The room was silent except for the faint hum of the old refrigerator. The alien woman sat on a thin mattress, her hands covering her face. The crumpled rent notice lay at her feet like a weapon ready to strike. It was her third warning. One more day and she would be on the streets. Her chest rose and fell quickly. She tried to steady her breath, but fear always returned, heavier each time. The world outside seemed normal. Cars rushing past, people laughing, children playing. Yet inside her little apartment, everything felt broken. She had come so far, across stars and storms, only to end up here, powerless. She looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror on the wall. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, something no human could ever hide. Her skin carried a pale shimmer, proof that she was not from this planet. She pulled her scarf tighter, even though no one else was there. The habit of hiding had become part of her life. She whispered to herself, "You must survive. You cannot give up." The words sounded weak, like a promise she didn't believe, but she repeated them again. She had to believe. The refrigerator door creaked as she opened it. A bottle of water, a half-empty jar of peanut butter, nothing else. She closed it quickly as if the emptiness inside might swallow her too. Her stomach twisted in pain, but she ignored it. Hunger was nothing compared to the fear of losing her home. Suddenly, a loud knock shook the door. She froze. Her heart pounded. "Rent!" The landlord's voice cut through the silence. "Tomorrow morning. No excuses. Or you're gone." She didn't answer. She sat perfectly still, not even breathing, as if silence could make her invisible. After a few moments, his heavy steps moved down the hallway. But his words stayed inside her mind, echoing like thunder. She pressed her forehead against the cold wall, her hands trembling. The memory of her old world returned. Shimmering towers, skies filled with silver light, laughter of children who never knew hunger. That world was gone, burned by war and betrayal. She had escaped with nothing, believing Earth might be kinder. But Earth had its own cruelty. Here, kindness had a price. She closed her eyes and thought of the humans she had observed. They were strange creatures, loud, impatient, always moving. But they carried something her people had lost. They valued small acts, a meal shared, a door held open, a smile offered at the right moment. She remembered watching a tired man in the building receive a hot meal from his neighbor, and the way his entire face softened with gratitude. It made her wonder, maybe survival wasn't only about money. Maybe survival was about giving what others didn't know they needed. Her eyes shifted to the window. Across the narrow street, her neighbor was struggling with a basket of laundry. Shirts and socks spilled onto the floor as he tried to unlock his door. His face showed frustration, exhaustion, and loneliness. She watched quietly, her mind racing. What do men love most? The thought slipped into her head. She didn't think of wealth or power. She thought of the small, simple comforts that made life lighter. A clean shirt after a long day. A home that felt warm. A smile that said, "You are not alone." She sat back down on the mattress, clutching the rent notice. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. For the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope. "I can't give money," she whispered. "But maybe I can give something else." Her fingers began folding the rent paper into neat squares, as if practicing for the idea forming in her mind. She remembered folding clothes for her younger brothers long ago, the joy they felt when their things were ready for them. She remembered her mother's words, "Care is stronger than coin." The night grew colder, but she barely noticed. She had found a thought to hold on to. If she could not pay the landlord with rent, she would find another way to survive. She would make an offer no human expected, but one that came from truth. Tomorrow, she decided, she would speak to the man across the street. She would admit her struggle, but she would not beg. Instead, she would offer to give him what she thought men secretly loved most. Not wealth, not beauty, not even words, but care. She would fold his laundry. She would smile. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to save her. She lay back on the mattress, pulling the thin blanket over her shoulders. Her body was weak, her stomach empty, but her heart carried something new, a plan. Tomorrow could bring rejection, laughter, or worse. But tomorrow also carried a chance for connection, a chance for survival. Her eyes closed slowly. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware of the fragile hope inside the tiny apartment. For the alien woman, the struggle was only beginning. And in the darkness, one thought repeated in her mind, stronger each time. I cannot pay the rent, but I can give him what a man loves most. The next morning arrived with a pale gray sky. The alien woman sat by the window, her hands pressed together as if gathering courage. She had not slept well. Every hour she woke up, afraid of the landlord's knock. But now the day had come, and she had to act. She saw her neighbor leave his apartment with a basket of laundry again. His shoulders were tense, his face tired, his steps slow. The clothes inside were crumpled and spilling out, but he didn't seem to care. She watched him, her heart racing. This was her chance. Her hands trembled as she opened her door. The hallway was narrow, filled with shadows. She stepped out quietly and called, "Excuse me." The man turned, surprised. His eyes studied her for a moment, cautious. She looked nervous, almost fragile, standing there with her scarf pulled tightly around her head. "Yes?" he asked, his voice flat. She swallowed hard, then forced herself to speak. I cannot pay my rent." Her words came slowly, carefully. "But I can offer something else. Something you may need." The man raised an eyebrow. He glanced at her door, then at the basket in his arms. "What are you talking about?" Her lips trembled into a small, uncertain smile. "I will do what a man loves most." She hesitated before finishing softly. "I will fold your laundry." For a moment, silence filled the hallway. The man stared at her as if trying to decide whether she was joking or insane. "Fold my laundry?" he repeated. She nodded quickly. "Yes, fold, clean, make them neat. I can do that. And I will smile while I do it." The man's mouth twitched, almost forming a laugh, but he stopped himself. "That's unusual," he said. He shifted the basket in his arms, unsure how to respond. She took a small step forward, her voice pleading but gentle. "I cannot give money, but I can give care. I can give small things that make life easier. Please, let me do this." The man hesitated. He had lived in this building for years, but he had never spoken much to her. He only knew she kept to herself, never caused trouble, and always avoided people. And now, out of nowhere, she was offering to fold his clothes in exchange for survival. Something about her tone, about the way her eyes shone with both fear and determination, made him pause. He could see she was serious. "You think folding laundry will solve your problem?" he asked, his voice sharp. Her smile faltered, but she nodded again. "Not solve, but maybe it will show I can give something. Please, just give me one chance." The man stood in the hallway, silent for a long moment. He felt an odd tug inside him. It wasn't pity exactly, but curiosity. Why would an alien, someone clearly struggling, offer something so simple, so human? Finally, he sighed. "Fine, one chance." He pushed open his door and motioned for her to come inside. Her heart leapt. She followed carefully, clutching her scarf tighter. His apartment was messy. Clothes scattered across chairs, socks on the floor, half-empty coffee cups on the table. She glanced around quietly, her eyes softening. This was not the home of a cruel man. This was the home of someone lonely. He dropped the basket on the couch. "There. Let's see what you can do." His tone was still doubtful, but his eyes stayed on her. She bent down and picked up a shirt. Her fingers moved slowly at first, unfamiliar with the fabric. She folded once, then twice, pressing the lines carefully. She placed it neatly on the couch. Then another shirt. Then a pair of pants. Slowly, the pile began to look organized. The man leaned against the wall, watching. At first, he expected her to give up, to do it clumsily. But she didn't. She worked carefully, patiently, as if each piece of clothing mattered. She didn't complain. She didn't rush. And every now and then, She looked up and gave a small smile. Something shifted inside the room. The air felt lighter. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. "Why laundry?" the man finally asked. His voice was quieter now. She paused, her hands resting on a folded shirt. "Because laundry is care. A man comes home tired, and his clothes are ready, neat, waiting. It is small, but it means someone thought of him. It means he is not alone." The man blinked. He had never thought of laundry that way. To him, it was just a chore, something he hated doing. But the way she spoke made it sound different, almost comforting. He crossed his arms, trying to hide his reaction. "You really believe that?" She nodded. "Yes. On my world, we showed love in small ways. Folding, cooking, cleaning. Not because we had to, but because it gave peace to the people we cared about." The man said nothing. He only kept watching as she continued, her hands moving with slow, steady rhythm. The pile of neat clothes grew taller, and for the first time in a long time, his messy apartment began to feel less heavy. When she finished, she looked up again and smiled, soft, warm, without force. "See?" she whispered. The man stared at the folded clothes, then at her. Something about her offer no longer seemed foolish. It seemed real. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. But deep inside, a door had opened, and neither of them realized how much it would change their lives. The man sat in his chair, arms folded, his eyes fixed on the neat stack of folded clothes. It was strange. His shirts, his socks, his pants, things he usually tossed around without care, now looked like they belonged to someone who mattered. Yet he could not shake off the unease pressing inside his chest. He studied the alien woman sitting quietly on the floor. Her hands rested on her knees, her scarf slipping slightly, revealing the faint shimmer of her skin. She lowered her gaze, waiting for his reaction. But he only leaned back, his mind heavy with doubt. Why would she do this? Why would anyone trade something so small for something so important? Rent was survival. Folding laundry was nothing. Unless there was something hidden. "You said you can't pay," he finally said, his voice slow. "But why me? Why here? There are shelters, aren't there? Or jobs you can try." Her fingers tightened around the edge of her scarf. "I tried. They would not take me. They see what I am." She lifted her eyes slightly, the glow in them clear for a moment before she looked away again. The man rubbed his chin. He had noticed her strange eyes before, though he never questioned it. People whispered in the building, calling her odd, saying she wasn't like the others. But most ignored her, too busy with their own problems. Now, sitting in his apartment, she looked fragile yet determined. Still, he wondered, what if this was some trick? What if she was hiding a darker plan? He stood and walked slowly around the room, his gaze never leaving her. "You could be lying," he said flatly. "Maybe you're just looking for a way to get inside, to take advantage." Her head snapped up, her voice trembling but sharp. "No, I would never." "Wouldn't you?" He stepped closer. "You show up, say you can't pay rent, then offer to fold laundry as if that fixes everything. Who does that? Nobody. Unless they're hiding something." Her eyes filled with fear but also something else, hurt. "I am not hiding lies," she whispered. "I am hiding myself. Because humans fear what they do not know." The man stopped in front of her. His shadow covered her small frame. He searched her face for answers, but all he saw was honesty carved into every line of her expression. Still, his suspicion clung to him. He had been burned before, people asking for help, then taking more than he could give. Trust was dangerous. She lowered her head again and spoke softly. "If you wish, I will leave, but I will not steal. I only wanted to offer something small, but real." The room went silent. The man felt his jaw tighten. He should tell her to leave, to lock the door, to forget this strange deal. Yet a part of him refused. Something in her voice, her careful words, her trembling hands. It did not feel like a lie. It felt like desperation mixed with sincerity. He paced the room, his thoughts loud. Could he trust her? Could he risk letting an alien woman stay near him? What if the landlord found out? What if others judged him? Finally, he sat down again, letting out a heavy sigh. I don't understand you, he admitted. You could have begged. You could have lied. But instead, you choose something so ordinary. Her lips curved into a small smile. Ordinary things are what keep hearts alive. The man blinked. The words struck him in a place he didn't expect. He thought about his own life. Long nights alone, silent meals, endless work. Ordinary things were missing from his world. No one cared if he came home tired. No one folded his laundry. No one smiled at him just for existing. Still, his suspicion refused to leave completely. He leaned forward, his eyes narrow. If I let you stay, if I let you do this, how do I know you won't bring trouble? How do I know you're not running from something worse? She hesitated, her breath catching. For a moment, he thought she would confess. But then she shook her head slowly. Not today. Today, I only bring folded shirts. The man leaned back again, his chest heavy. Her answer didn't clear the fog. It made him wonder even more. What was she running from? Why Earth? Why here in his building at his door? His suspicion grew, but so did his curiosity. He could not ignore the feeling that something larger was hiding behind her gentle offer. The alien woman sat silently, her hands still, her eyes lowered. She knew he didn't fully trust her yet. She knew suspicion was sharp in his mind. But she also knew trust was not built in a moment. It was built piece by piece, like folded clothes stacked neatly on top of each other. As evening shadows filled the room, both sat in silence. Suspicion hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. Neither knew what the next day would bring. But both knew one thing. Something had begun, and it would not end with folded laundry. The next morning, sunlight slipped weakly through the blinds of the man's small apartment. Dust floated in the golden beams, lighting up the mess that had become normal for him. Empty coffee cups still sat on the table. A pile of laundry leaned against the wall, and shoes were scattered near the door. The alien woman stood quietly near the couch, her hands clasped together. She waited, nervous but steady. The man rubbed the back of his neck, unsure of what to do next. Part of him still doubted her, but another part, curious and restless, wanted to see if she meant what she promised. He gestured toward the heap of clothes. There. If you're serious, start with that. His tone carried a mix of challenge and caution, as if he expected her to fail. She nodded, her scarf slipping slightly as she knelt by the pile. Her long fingers touched the fabric carefully, as if it were fragile. She picked up a shirt, wrinkled and stained, and studied it closely. Her expression softened. This shirt has seen many long days, she murmured, almost to herself. The man raised an eyebrow. It's just a shirt. But she didn't agree. She began folding, slow and deliberate. Her hands moved awkwardly at first. The cloth was different from what she knew on her world, but she adjusted quickly. Each crease was pressed with care, each edge lined perfectly. The man leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching. He tried to keep his face blank, but something in her movements unsettled him. She wasn't rushing, she wasn't careless. It was as if each shirt, each pair of pants, carried a story she wanted to protect. One by one, the pile grew smaller. Neat stacks began to form on the couch, tall and clean. The room, though still messy, started to feel lighter. She looked up once, catching his gaze. She gave a small, calm smile before returning to the task. That smile unsettled him more than her silence. It wasn't forced. It wasn't desperate. It was peaceful. He cleared his throat. So, what's the point of this? You think folding clothes is enough to make someone forget about rent? About rules? She paused for a moment, then folded another shirt. Not forget, she said softly, but maybe remember. Remember that life is not only work, not only bills, not only fear. Small things matter. Small things keep the heart alive. Her words lingered in the room like quiet music. The man looked away, pretending not to hear them. Yet something inside him shifted. He thought of his long nights, of eating dinner alone, of tossing dirty clothes aside because he was too tired to care. Nobody ever cared whether his shirts were clean or wrinkled. Nobody ever smiled at him when he came home. And now, here was this alien woman, folding laundry as if it were sacred work. He shook his head, trying to chase the thought away. It's just clothes. Don't be fooled. But he could not deny the feeling. After nearly an hour, she placed the last folded shirt on the pile. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing. There, she whispered. Finished. The man stepped forward, glancing at the stacks. The clothes looked different now. Not new, not special, but organized, clean, cared for. For the first time in years, he felt like his home had order, like someone had thought about him beyond the walls of responsibility. You really did it? He muttered, almost surprised. She nodded, her smile faint but genuine. I said I would. He rubbed his chin, unsure how to respond. Suspicion still lingered, but it was weaker now, struggling against something warmer. He didn't want to admit it, but he felt grateful. You don't expect me to pay you for this, do you? He asked carefully. She shook her head quickly. No, I only ask for a chance. Place. I will give care in return. The man stared at her, searching her face for lies, but he found none. She looked tired, thin, and uncertain, yet her eyes carried a light he hadn't seen in a long time. For the first time since she had stepped into his apartment, he softened. One task doesn't change everything, he warned. But it's a start. Her shoulders lifted, the weight of fear easing just slightly. A start is all I need. The room fell silent again, but this silence felt different from before. It wasn't heavy with suspicion. It was filled with possibility, fragile but alive. As she gathered the folded clothes into neat stacks, the man realized something strange. For the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. And though he didn't want to admit it, he wanted to see what she would do next. Days passed like quiet ripples across a still pond. What had begun as a strange agreement slowly began to take shape. The alien woman stayed in the man's apartment during the day, folding laundry, dusting corners, and organizing things that had been ignored for years. At first, she moved carefully, as if afraid she might break something, or break his trust. But soon, her hands grew steady, her steps more confident. The man watched her from a distance, always with cautious eyes. Yet he could not deny the change. His once messy home was no longer suffocating. Shirts were neatly stacked, socks paired, dishes cleaned, and the faint scent of soap filled the air. It was not grand or luxurious, but it was comforting. One evening, after a long day at work, he entered the apartment to find her sitting by the table. A small meal waited for him. Nothing special, just bread, soup, and tea. But the sight made him stop in his tracks. You cooked this? He asked, his voice uncertain. She nodded shyly. I saw you come home tired. I thought maybe this would help. He stared at the meal for a moment before sitting down. The first spoonful was warm, not perfect, but filled with care. He chewed slowly, realizing he couldn't remember the last time anyone had cooked for him. As he ate, she sat quietly, watching his expression with nervous hope. When he finally said, "It's good," her entire face lit up with a smile so pure that it startled him. Something shifted between them that night. From then on, their conversations began to grow. At first, only small words. "Did you have a long day?" she would ask. "Too long," he would reply, loosening his shoes. Sometimes, she would ask about the machines he worked with, the tall buildings outside, or the strange sounds of the city. He answered simply, always guarded, but secretly surprised at her curiosity. Other times, he found himself asking questions about her. "Your hands, they move differently when you fold. Why?" She would pause, then answer softly, "On my world, we folded in patterns." It showed care. It showed love. Her words sank deep into his mind. He began to notice the little details. How she always placed his shirts in perfect lines, how she hummed softly while working, how she smiled whenever he entered the room. The loneliness that had lived with him for years began to retreat. He didn't admit it aloud, but he began looking forward to returning home. Still, trust did not come easily. One night, As she folded his clothes, he asked, "Why me? Why my door?" Her hands froze for a moment. She lowered her gaze. "Because your eyes look tired," she whispered. "And tired eyes need kindness." Her answer left him silent. He had no reply, but her words echoed inside him long after she finished folding. Days turned into weeks. The alien woman became part of his routine, not as an intruder, but as a presence that softened the edges of his life. He noticed small things, like how she laughed quietly when she managed to cook rice without burning it, or how she stood by the window watching the stars as if searching for something far away. One evening, he found her sitting alone, staring at her hands. Her smile was gone. "What's wrong?" he asked, his tone softer than usual. She hesitated before speaking. "I wonder if this is enough. If folding, cleaning, cooking can truly keep me safe here." The man looked at her carefully. He wanted to tell her it was foolish, that the world was not kind enough to accept such small offerings. But instead, he said, "It's more than most people give." She lifted her head, her eyes shining faintly in the dim light. "Do you believe that?" He nodded, almost surprising himself. "Yes." A silence followed, but it wasn't heavy. It was filled with something unspoken, an understanding slowly growing between them. From that night on, their connection deepened. The suspicion that once clouded his mind began to fade. He still didn't know everything about her, where she truly came from, what she was hiding, or why her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. But he no longer felt the need to push her away. Instead, he let her stay, and she, in return, gave him more than folded laundry. She gave him warmth, companionship, and a reason to believe that even in a city full of strangers, someone could care about him. Their bond was fragile, like glass, but each day added a new layer of strength. The walls between them slowly crumbled, replaced by something that neither of them had expected: trust. But trust, as they would soon learn, was only the beginning. The nights were getting colder. The small heater in the man's apartment buzzed weakly, struggling against the chill that crept through the thin walls. The alien woman sat near the window, her scarf wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes followed the stars above, shining faintly through the clouds. Each star pulled at her memory, each one a reminder of the home she had lost. The man returned late that evening, shoulders heavy from work. He dropped his bag near the door and rubbed his temples. "Another long day," he muttered. He looked around, expecting the neat stacks of clothes and the warm tea she often left waiting for him. They were there, just as always, but her smile was missing. He frowned. Something wrong. She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the edge of her scarf. The landlord came again today. The man's jaw clenched. He had grown used to the landlord's loud threats, but he didn't like the thought of him banging on the door while she was inside alone. "What did he say?" Her voice trembled. "He said if money is not paid tomorrow, he will throw everything out. He said, he doesn't care what happens to me." The man's eyes darkened. He sat down across from her. "And what did you tell him?" She lowered her gaze. "Nothing. I stayed silent. Because, what could I say?" For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the heater. The man leaned back, running a hand across his face. "You can't keep living like this," he said firmly. "You need to tell me the truth. Who are you really? Why are you here?" Her breath caught. She had feared this moment. She had hoped to avoid it, to keep hiding behind small acts of care. But now, pressed between the landlord's threats and the man's questions, she knew she could not remain silent. Her eyes lifted, glowing faintly in the dim light. "My world is gone." The man stiffened. "Gone." She nodded slowly. "Destroyed. Burned in war. I was a child when the fighting began, but I remember the fire, the screams, the sky turning black. My people scattered among the stars. Some found homes. Others did not. I found Earth." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. "When I arrived, I thought humans would help. But they saw my eyes, my skin, and they turned me away. They whispered strange, dangerous, not like us. I tried to hide, to work, but nobody wanted me. I had nothing left but these hands. So I decided I will use them for small things, to show I can give, even if I cannot pay. The man sat in silence, his chest heavy. Her words were not rehearsed. They came raw, each one trembling with pain. He saw the truth in her eyes that had seen loss greater than anything he could imagine. You should have told me sooner, he said finally, his tone low. She looked away. Would you have believed me? Or would you have sent me away like the others? The question stung. He wanted to argue, to say he was not like the others, but deep down he knew the answer. He probably would have turned her away. Suspicion had ruled him for too long. Now guilt pressed against him. The woman wrapped her scarf tighter and whispered, folding laundry, cooking, cleaning. These are not just chores for me. They are survival. They are the only way I know how to stay. Her voice faded, but the silence that followed was louder than any words. The man leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. He studied her carefully. She was fragile, thinner than she should be, her hands trembling slightly from cold and exhaustion. Yet she carried a strength he could not ignore. She had lost everything, yet she still chose to give something, no matter how small. Why my door? He asked again, softer this time. She smiled faintly, though her eyes were wet. Because your eyes look tired. And I knew tired eyes understand pain. The man swallowed hard. He looked away, unable to answer. Her words struck too close to home. For years, he had lived in quiet struggle, pushing through each day with no one to notice. Now, this strange woman, broken yet unyielding, had seen through him in a single glance. The weight of her truth lingered in the room. The man's suspicion was not gone, but it had changed. It was no longer about whether she was lying. It was about whether he was ready to believe her, to carry the burden of her truth alongside his own. As the night deepened, he finally spoke, his voice low but firm. You're not alone anymore. Not while you're here. The alien woman closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel something close to relief. But outside the apartment, the landlord was preparing for tomorrow. And tomorrow would test whether this fragile truth could survive in a world that cared little for broken promises or alien hearts. Morning came with a sharp knock on the door. The sound was loud, harsh, and full of authority. The alien woman froze, her hands tightening around the scarf at her neck. She knew who it was before he even spoke. Rent! The landlord barked. Last chance. Pay now or I throw you both out. Today. The man rose slowly from his chair, his jaw set. He glanced at the woman, who sat trembling on the couch, her eyes wide with fear. Her secret was out now, her truth exposed. She had nowhere to run. If the landlord pushed, she would be on the streets again. The knock came louder this time. Open the door. The man took a deep breath, then unlocked it. The landlord stood there, arms crossed, his face red with anger. Behind him, a few curious neighbors peeked from their doors, whispering. You have no money, the landlord snapped. I warned you. Get out. His eyes shifted to the alien woman, his voice dripping with disdain. And take your little pet project with you. The man's fists clenched. Something inside him snapped. For weeks, he had watched her fold clothes, cook meals, smile despite hunger and fear. He had seen her truth, heard her pain, felt her quiet strength. She was no pet. She was no burden. She was a survivor. She stays, he said firmly. The landlord blinked, then laughed bitterly. Stays? You can't even pay. Do you think kindness pays the bills? The man stepped closer, his voice steady but sharp. No, but it matters. More than you'll ever understand. The neighbors murmured, their whispers spreading. The landlord's face darkened. Then you pay, right now, or I empty this apartment. The man's heart pounded. He didn't have enough to cover everything. He knew the landlord had the power to push them both into the cold. But as he looked back at the alien woman, her eyes shimmering with fear, her body shaking under the weight of rejection, he made his choice. I'll find a way, he said. She's not leaving. Not while I'm here. The landlord scowled. You'll regret this. He turned sharply and stormed down the hall, his heavy footsteps echoing. The neighbors disappeared behind their doors, but the whispers lingered in the air. When the door closed, silence filled the room. The alien woman sat motionless, staring at him. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Finally, she whispered, "Why? Why would you do this for me?" The man sighed, leaning against the door. "Because you gave me something I didn't even know I needed. You cared. No one has done that for me in years." Her eyes softened, tears glimmering. "But I have nothing to give you. Nothing but small things." He shook his head. "Sometimes, small things are the only things that matter." The words sank deep into her heart. For the first time since leaving her home world, she felt safe. Not because she was hidden, but because someone had chosen to stand with her. That night, they sat together at the table. The man shared his simple meal, and for once, he didn't feel alone while eating it. She told him stories of her people, of the songs they sang while working, of the way families held each other through storms. He listened quietly, realizing how much strength hid beneath her fragile frame. Days turned into weeks again. The landlord still lingered, pressing for payment, but he could no longer scare her the same way. She had someone standing beside her now. The man worked harder, taking extra shifts, doing whatever he could. And though life remained difficult, it no longer felt empty. Their bond grew deeper with each passing day. He came home not only to folded laundry or warm meals, but to the quiet comfort of her presence. She, in return, found healing in his acceptance, in the way he no longer looked at her with suspicion but with trust. One evening, as the stars glittered faintly outside the window, she said softly, "On my world, we believed the greatest gift was not wealth or power. It was belonging. To belong is to live." The man nodded, his gaze steady on her. "Then you belong here." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were not from fear. They were from relief, from gratitude, from hope. The choice had been made. Not by fate, not by chance, but by a simple human decision to protect, to accept, to stand beside someone who had nothing left but the will to give. And in that choice, both their lives changed forever. For the alien woman, survival was no longer just folding laundry or offering small smiles. It was about finding a place where her truth could exist without fear. For the man, life was no longer about silence and loneliness. It was about discovering that sometimes, what a man loves most is not the comfort of folded clothes, but the courage to stand for someone else. The struggle was not over. Challenges remained, and the world outside was still harsh. But inside that small apartment, something powerful had been built: trust, belonging, and a fragile but unbreakable bond. And for both of them, it was enough to begin again.